What if the raging conflict over Palestine isn't just a matter of borders or politics, but a divine plan that no human peace treaty can ever resolve? For centuries, world leaders, empires and nations have tried to lay claim to this land, with solutions always seeming out of reach. But what if the reason no solution has ever worked is because the battle for Palestine is not meant to be solved by human hands? According to the Bible, the ongoing struggle over this land was predicted thousands of years ago. And it's not merely a political or territorial issue, it's a matter of prophecy. The land we now call Palestine has been at the center of a spiritual war, with ancient peoples like the Canaanites and Philistines clashing with God's chosen people, Israel. What if the real reason for the ongoing conflict is that Palestine holds the key to end times prophecy and its fate is already sealed in Scripture? In this video, we'll delve deep into the biblical origins of Palestine, its connection to ancient prophecies, and how this region is destined to play a critical role in the final events of history. You'll come to understand that the battle for Palestine isn't just a war over land. It's a battle for the fulfillment of God's plan, one that no political agreement can truly settle. To understand the biblical origins of Palestine, we must first look back to Canaan, the ancient land that the Bible describes as the inheritance promised by God to Abraham and his descendants. The land of Canaan, which largely corresponds to modern-day Israel and the Palestinian territories, was inhabited by a collection of different tribes and peoples long before the Israelites arrived. These people, known collectively as the Canaanites, play a significant role in the biblical narrative as the inhabitants of the land promised to the descendants of Abraham. Genesis 10:15 to 19 offers a list of the descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons. Among these descendants are the Sidonians, Hittites, Amorites, Jebusites, and other tribes that occupied the land. The Bible records that these groups were deeply entrenched in the worship of pagan gods, practicing idolatry and religious rituals that were abhorrent to the God of Israel, such as child sacrifice and fertility rites. In Genesis 15:16, God informs Abraham that his descendants will eventually inherit the land of Canaan, but not until the sins of the Canaanites have reached their full measure. This verse indicates that God's decision to give the land of Canaan to Israel was not only a promise to the Israelites, but also an act of judgment upon the inhabitants of the land for their pervasive wickedness. The Canaanites are, in many ways, the biblical archetype of nations that stand in opposition to God's chosen people, the Israelites. The conquest of Canaan by the Israelites under Joshua, described in the book of Joshua, is framed as both a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham and a judgment against the Canaanite people for their centuries of idol worship and moral corruption. However, the land was more than a battlefield for conquest. It was a covenant land. It was meant to be a place where God's people would live in holiness, following his laws and serving as a light to the nations. The land of Canaan, later known as Palestine, was thus imbued with prophetic significance from the moment it was promised to Abraham. But the story of the land does not end with Canaan's conquest by Israel. The very presence of ancient peoples like the Canaanites, Philistines, and others set the stage for ongoing conflict, a conflict that would persist for millennia. The next significant group to influence the biblical understanding of Palestine are the Philistines, whose name is the root of the modern term Palestine. The Philistines were a seafaring people believed to have originated from Crete and other parts of the Aegean world, migrating to the coastal regions of Canaan around the 12th century BC. They established 5 powerful city-states: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, which collectively formed Philistia. The Philistines are one of the most well-known enemies of Israel in the Bible, constantly clashing with the Israelites in a series of military conflicts. The Philistines are first mentioned in Genesis 21:32 during the time of Abraham, but their most significant role comes during the period of the Judges and the early monarchy of Israel. The most famous Philistine figure is, of course, Goliath, the giant warrior who was defeated by the young David in one of the most iconic moments in the Bible, 1 Samuel 17. David's victory over Goliath symbolized more than just a military triumph. It was a moment of spiritual conquest, where the power of God overcame the might of Israel's enemies. However, the Philistines were more than just military adversaries. They represent, in the biblical narrative, the spiritual forces of opposition to God's covenant people. The Philistines worshipped gods like Dagon, Baal, and Astarte, and their presence in the land of Canaan was a constant threat to the purity of Israel's worship of Yahweh. The Philistines are frequently portrayed as a thorn in Israel's side, but they also serve as instruments through which God delivers Israel when they cry out for help, as seen in the stories of Samson, Judges 13-16, and David. The Philistines' lasting impact is seen even in their name. After the Jewish Bar Kokhba revolt against Roman rule in AD 135, the Romans sought to erase the Jewish identity of the land and renamed it Palestina, drawing from the Philistines as an ancient enemy of Israel. The name stuck and became the term we use today, Palestine. Though the Philistines eventually disappeared from history as a distinct people group, their influence and opposition to Israel echo through the centuries, reflected in the modern conflicts between Jews and Palestinians over the same contested land. The history of Palestine between biblical times and the modern era is marked by the domination of foreign empires. After the fall of the Babylonian Empire, the land passed through the hands of the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. The conquest of Jerusalem by Caliph Umar in AD 637 marked the beginning of Islamic rule over Palestine, and for centuries the land was part of the Islamic caliphates. During the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the region from 1517 until the early 20th century, Palestine became a part of the larger Ottoman domain. Under Ottoman rule, the region saw waves of Arab, Jewish, Christian and Muslim populations living side by side, though tensions between these groups often flared into conflict. The roots of the modern Palestinian identity were forged during the Ottoman period, as Arab Muslim inhabitants of the land became the dominant population in the region. The rise of Zionism in the 19th century, an international movement calling for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, set the stage for the intense conflict that would follow in the 20th century, as Jewish immigrants began arriving in greater numbers, especially in the early 1900s. Tensions between the Arab population and Jewish settlers increased. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, issued by the British government, endorsed the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, further escalating the conflict. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, the surrounding Arab nations, including the Arab Palestinians living in the region, vehemently opposed the establishment of a Jewish state in what they considered to be Arab land. This set off a series of wars, including the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Six-Day War of 1967, and the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But beyond the political and territorial disputes, the conflict over the land of Palestine is deeply rooted in a spiritual struggle, a struggle foretold in the Bible. The Bible has much to say about the future of the land of Palestine, particularly Jerusalem, and the prophetic significance it holds. In the Bible, the land of Palestine is not merely a geographical location. It is a land set apart by God for His purposes. The struggles over this land, especially the city of Jerusalem, are depicted as central to God's plan for the end times. One of the most striking prophecies concerning the future of Jerusalem is found in Zechariah 12:2-3, where God declares, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." This prophecy is remarkable in light of today's events. The struggle for control over Jerusalem, which both Jews and Palestinians claim as their capital, continues to be a focal point of international tension. According to the Bible, this conflict will only intensify in the last days, as all nations will eventually gather against Jerusalem. But why Jerusalem? The Bible presents Jerusalem as the city chosen by God, the place where He has established His name. It is the city where King David established his throne, and the city where Solomon built the temple, the central place of worship for the Israelites. According to biblical prophecy, Jerusalem is also the city where Jesus Christ will return to reign as King of Kings, Zechariah 14:4. Another key prophecy concerning Palestine is found in Joel 3:2, where God says, "I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land." This prophecy speaks of a future judgment that God will bring upon the nations for their role in dividing the land of Israel, land that includes what is today considered Palestine. The division of Jerusalem and the broader land of Israel is a central issue in modern peace negotiations, with many advocating for a two-state solution that would divide the land between Israel and a future Palestinian state. But according to biblical prophecy, the land belongs to God, and efforts to divide it will bring divine judgment. The book of Revelation also speaks of a time when the nations of the earth will gather for a final battle in the Valley of Armageddon, located in modern-day Palestine, Revelation 16:16. While the Bible does not directly mention the modern Palestinians, it speaks extensively about the land they inhabit and the future struggles surrounding it. The ancient conflicts between the Israelites and the peoples of Canaan and Philistia serve as precursors to the ongoing strife between Jews and Palestinians. These ancient battles over the land were not just political, they were spiritual struggles for the destiny of God's people and His covenant. Many biblical scholars see the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict as a continuation of the ancient enmity between Isaac and Ishmael, the sons of Abraham. Isaac, through whom the covenant was established, became the father of the Israelites, while Ishmael became the father of the Arab peoples. In Genesis 16:12, Ishmael is described as a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Some interpret this as a prophecy of the ongoing strife between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. The Bible also makes numerous references to Edom, the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, which is often associated with the Arab nations surrounding Israel. The book of Obadiah contains prophecies of judgment against Edom for their role in opposing Israel, and some see these prophecies as applying to the broader Arab-Israeli conflict today. Despite the ongoing conflict, the Bible also offers a glimpse of hope for peace in the region. In Isaiah 19:23-25, the prophet foresees a future where Egypt, Assyria, which includes parts of modern Palestine, and Israel will live in harmony. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. The Assyrians will go to Egypt and the Egyptians to Assyria. The Egyptians and Assyrians will worship together. In that day, Israel will be the third, along with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing on the earth. The Lord Almighty will bless them, saying, "Blessed be Egypt my people, Assyria my handiwork, and Israel my inheritance." This prophecy points to a future time when reconciliation will occur between Israel and the surrounding nations, including the Palestinians, as part of God's ultimate plan for peace. However, this peace will not come through political negotiations. It will come through the return of the Messiah. At the heart of the Bible's prophetic narrative is the promise of the Messiah, the anointed one who will bring peace and establish God's kingdom on earth. For Christians, this Messiah is Jesus Christ, who fulfilled many of the Old Testament prophecies during his first coming, and who will return to fulfill the rest. The Bible makes it clear that when Jesus returns, he will establish his kingdom in Jerusalem. In Zechariah 14:4, the prophet describes the day when Jesus will stand on the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem, and defeat the nations gathered against the city. The return of Christ will mark the end of human rule and the beginning of God's eternal kingdom, where righteousness and peace will reign. But what does this mean for the Palestinians and others living in the land? According to the Bible, when Christ returns, he will bring justice to all nations, including the Palestinians. In Isaiah 2:4, the prophet describes a time when he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This future vision of peace promises that the ongoing conflict over Palestine will one day be resolved, not through human efforts, but through the intervention of God himself. The Bible makes it clear that the land of Palestine is not just a piece of real estate, it is a land chosen by God for his purposes. The conflicts we see today are the outworking of ancient prophecies, and they will continue to unfold according to God's plan. In the end, the Bible promises that peace will come to this land, but it will not come through human efforts. It will come through the return of the Messiah, who will bring justice, peace, and reconciliation to all peoples, including the Palestinians.